Welcome, everyone, to the Shine Your Light podcast with myself and Stacy Leone. So, on today's show, we have Ed Thrall, a master energy healer and the creator of his own breathwork method, which helps his clients experience deep meditative relaxation and that has proven physical benefits.
Thanks, Gil. Ed was also a longtime teacher at the Brennan School of Healing, and that's where we got to know him. Gil and I are both students there, or maybe by the time you see this, we won't be students, we'll be somewhere out in the
Graduates.
world practicing. He taught there for about 16 years, I think, and I have to say, every time I do one of Ed's breathwork sessions, I'm like knocked out cold. So,
In a good way.
in a good way, completely. And yeah, it's just the energy really moves through your system. Ed developed this method himself over many years, and he now teaches on Zoom and in person, I believe. He's in Florida. So,
Yeah.
welcome, Ed. Thanks.
Welcome, Ed, and welcome to our podcast today. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Shine Your Light podcast. Stacy, thanks for hosting this with me. And Ed Thrall, we're so honored to have you as a guest on our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Luckily, my face is usually red, so you won't see me blushing.
I mean the accolades and your experience, your wisdom, your light is just phenomenal, and we're really just blessed to have you with us today. Um, you've been with the Brennan School of Healing down in Florida for I think over 20 years.
Well, I've been teaching for 16, so I don't know if you add in the 4 years in the school and then 3 years of BIP and advanced studies. So yeah, it's close to, yeah, it's around 20.
That's
Yeah, a little over
fantastic.
20. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you've also have a background in breath work for about the same amount of time.
Yeah. And trained in remote viewing with Lynn Buchanan at, it was formerly Army Intelligence remote viewer. And the reason I mentioned that is because it opened up a whole, uh, it was kind of an awakening of what was possible as far as your consciousness goes.
That's so
Yeah,
interesting. I wonder about that. Were you in the military, Ed? Is that how that connection came about?
No, actually, I grew up in a military family. My father had a career in the Air Force, but he retired just before I started high school. So I was familiar with military bases and military protocol. I guess like my father kind of treated us like we were troops, which was pretty brutal. Included
Is
group punishments, things like he was a little over the top when it came to discipline.
when you
But
say
wow.
group punishments, do you mean if one person did something wrong, then
yeah, I
the
had three
whole?
sisters. Yeah, and that was the case. If somebody broke something or did something wrong, we all got punished, and that's
Wow.
what they do in the military.
Hmm.
If you know, so yeah, it was kind of crazy. But I kind of I guess that's where it starts is because I was in a brutal environment. I spent probably the first 10 years of my life mostly out of my body.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I was real familiar with that, astral travel, and so it just came second nature. And when I realized that other people didn't have a conscious awareness of it, even though I think we all astral travel, especially when we go to sleep, it's like, well, I was curious. People don't remember, traveling around when they're asleep, and so yeah, yeah.
That's so
So
interesting. So it's sort of like a combo of like you had this discipline in because you were in a military family, harsh discipline sounds like.
yeah,
And then you also had this ability, which gave you in a way the ability to go elsewhere.
yeah. Escape. That was my escape. Yeah,
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah.
And do you mind sharing about or how you would describe, escaping, I guess, or astral travel during that period of time?
Well, it just seemed like a natural transition. I didn't, it's different than when I went to the Monroe Institute, and that's where I found out about the Barbara Brennan School. you'd have this vibration. You'd listen to these hemisync tapes and you'd feel this vibration in your body. Then you'd leave your body. But when I was a child, I didn't have any memories of that separation of the shaking and all that before I left my body. It was just, I was gone. And curious, I could tell you a story about Barbara. When I was a teacher trainee, there was only I did it in the European school because in Austria because my wife had just started the school in the U.S. and I didn't want to be in her way or I wanted her to have her own space and not oh, your husband's this teacher. So I did my teacher training in Austria, and there was only one other teacher trainee, and that was a guy named Martin Fijan, who was from Holland. And we had an incident one time where, as a teacher trainee, every week you have to meet with the dean to go over your what's going on, and your what you're learning, what you're doing well at, what you're struggling with, things like that. So one week, all the deans were having a meeting, and they weren't available to do our supervision. So Barbara
Mm-hmm.
volunteered to do our supervision, which was like pretty nerve wracking. So, but me and my roommate, who was the other teacher trainee, we were struggling that week, and it's like she asked us so what we are doing. We're just like both in tears, and just like really struggling to hold the space for the students and everything. And so she just sat there and she said, "Okay, just pause, take a breath." She looked at each one of us, and it was almost like she was watching a movie. Her high sense perception was amazing. She just rolled back in time and described everything that happened to us that week. It was like, what the hell? She can do that? Yeah, well, she could do that. And so she was describing at one point. She says, "Oh, you kept leaving your body," and she says, "Well, Ed, you're kind of unique because when you leave your body, it actually looks like you're dying." And she described how I came out of through the silver cord in the back of my head and everything, and I was just like, "This is amazing," And so that, I thought, okay, that's interesting. It's like I'm so profoundly afraid of being in my body that it's like I'm dying when I leave my body. Sometimes it's like it's such a disconnect.
Did it feel that
Like,
way to you, Ed?
what's
Did
that?
did that did what Barbara say to you resonate with your own experience? Did it feel that way, like you were dying?
Oh, she was very compassionate and said, "Well, don't take this stuff so seriously. You know, we all make mistakes," and that kind of coordinated with Lori Keene. Well, I taught on her team on year one, and she said, "Ed, you ask a lot of questions. Why is that?" She said, "Well," I said, "I don't want to make any mistakes." And she says, "Oh my God, you're doomed." Because I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and so that was like, wow, that's a little okay. It's okay to screw up, and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, or and
Yeah.
you're not going to die because
Mm,
I guess childhood wounding is you make a mistake and your life's in danger. You know,
yeah,
so
sounds like it
yeah,
literally was.
big
When she
lesson.
when she was yeah, when she was rolling back in time with you, did she like recount like different just things that were taking place
Yeah, like I
that
said,
caused you to leave your body?
it was like she was watching a movie.
So
She was
she
that.
saw like the actual experiences that you were having, like she was
Yes,
watching the movie,
yes,
this happened, that happened, and then
yeah,
energetically that's what happened while that activity was happening.
yeah. She was just amazing. The only other person I've ever met that was as psychic as her and had those abilities was a guy named Ingo Swann, who was the one that they used to create the military remote viewing program. And I
Hmm.
Mm.
got a story about him too. I went, he was, I guess because people knew how psychic he was like people always wanting his time and and him get him to do stuff for him because by the so back, I'm trying to think. I think I had just started the school and I had taken the remote viewing training with Lynn Buchanan, and Ingo Schwann was going to be out of, he was a recluse. He lived in the Bowery in New York. But him and Lynn were good friends, and so Lynn said, "Hey, he's coming out of seclusion and he's going to be at this remote viewing concert convention in Austin, Texas." So me and another buddy of mine went, and we both had books that were written by Ingo Swann. There's amazing books. If you ever get a hold of one, you got to read it. They're out of print, and if you go look on eBay or someplace like that, their prices are over $1,000 for this little
Mm.
paperback book. But anyway, we each brought our books to get signed by him, but we couldn't get anywhere near him because all of his friends were gathering around. It was like there was a whole entourage, and it's like, and we didn't want to be invasive, so we just kind of held back. And the day the convention ended, we're waiting in the lobby, and we'd not told anybody we had these books or that we wanted to sign them. So we're waiting in the lobby to catch our ride to the airport. The elevator opens up. Ingo Swann walks out. He's by himself. He walks straight to us and says, "I understand you have some books for me to sign." And our jaws just dropped. We had not told anybody. And he just read it, I guess, in our field, or just, I guess we were sending out this signal that, and so we're just there, in shock, and he signs our books.
Wow.
And
So
That is so.
I
yeah,
wonder, for people listening who might not know what going back in time means, rolling back in time, can you maybe is there a method? Is it just pure high sense perception? Does it come unbidden, or is it something that you can control? And is it something that you practice? And how does it relate to remote viewing?
well, for me, sometimes that happens spontaneously, but I don't have a good control of it. I guess maybe the best example I could give one time when I was taking the remote viewing training with Lynn like 25 years ago. Um, when you practice remote viewing, they give you a target, which is usually a photograph of a place or an event, uh, either back in time. And the um, one that sticks in my mind the most, where I actually bilocated to the target, it was a photograph of downtown Corpus Christi, Texas, 100 years ago. And at that time, I was in New Mexico, and Corpus Christi, Texas, of course, I don't know, that's hundreds of miles away on the coast of Texas. And the
Mm.
target was this downtown scene of this city. And I felt like I was in two places at once. That I've only had that experience a couple of times where I knew I was in that room sitting with the other students and Lynn, and Lynn was monitoring the session, and I actually found myself standing on the corner in that city, which in the photograph, which was in 100 years prior, and I named some things that were very specific. And one of the things that caught my eye was there was a policeman standing on the corner across from me, and he was wearing a green uniform. And I never remembered seeing a police officer wearing a green uniform.
Hmm.
And I just really kind of stayed with that. I said, well, he's a policeman, but he's wearing a odd green uniform. It looks more like a military uniform, but he's a policeman. And so when you finish working the target after about half an hour for an hour, they unseal the envelope, they lay the photograph in front of you, and there was this police officer standing on the corner in the green uniform. And so that's what happens. Something that's peculiar that catches your attention, usually you get drawn to it.
Mm.
And the whole the whole reason that I got into remote viewing is when I went to the Monroe Institute. One of the most famous remote viewers is a guy named Joe McMoneagle. He makes a living doing remote viewing for big corporations, basically predicting future trends. And so he did a little on one of the programs there. He did a little preview of what remote viewing's all about. And I think the target he had us work was that Devil's Tower and out west. It looks like a tree stump, but it's a huge mountain with a flat top. I
Yep.
Huh.
think it,
In
it was.
Utah,
It
yeah.
might have been in that movie E.T.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I said, "Well, I nailed that target, so I might have some potential for this." So I got a buddy of mine who lives in Vancouver, Washington, well, first of all, what I thought, oh, well, if I can do this, maybe I can see the numbers to win the lottery. So I says, I want you to write down 6 numbers, put them in an envelope, and put the envelope on top of your refrigerator. And I'm going to try to remote view what's in the envelope. So okay, he'd had a couple of paranormal experiences himself, out of body experiences, so he went along with me. So I sat down, I listened to a Monroe Hemi-Sync tape. I, quiet the mind, try to get in perceptive, and I was there wandering around his house. Um, I bilocated there because I was also aware that I was still sitting in my chair. And I saw the envelope on top of the refrigerator, but I kept getting drawn to a letter with the seal of the state of Washington on it that was on his kitchen table.
Hmm.
And so, as hard as I tried to look in that envelope to see the numbers, I kept getting sucked back to this letter with the seal of the state of Washington on it. And so I did the thing, and I finally gave up after about half an hour or so. And then I called him and I said, well, I didn't have any luck with the numbers. I saw the envelope, but what is that letter that's on your kitchen table? Because there's something about that that's important. As it turns out, his son had just moved back in with him, who was, I think, 20 years old at the time. He got in a DUI, and that was a letter from the state uh, suspending his license, and they had been arguing about that for the last 2 or 3 days. So there was all this
Mm.
emotional energy tied to that letter. And he says, "You could see that letter?" I said, "I could see it. I couldn't read it, but I could see the seal of the state of Washington on it." And he said, "Well, that's what that was about." I says, "Well," and then I learned you get sucked in when you're trying to remote view. You get sucked into things that hold emotional energy. So
Wow.
Mm.
it's a distraction, but it actually, it was well, kind of validated that I could do it, but that those are some of the impediments is the getting distracted by things. And
Hmm.
in the remote viewing community, they call that doorknobbing because they had a famous there was one, I think it was published, one of his colleagues when they were remote viewing a target, and they'd always use multiple remote viewers, maybe 3 or 4 guys to remote view the same target, and they would be separated. They wouldn't be doing it in the same room together, no conversation between the remote viewers. And their assignment was to remote view this house that they thought there was some spy activity going on in. But the one remote viewer, he gets to the house in his remote viewing session, and the house has got a beautiful crystal doorknob. And this guy described and drew pictures of the crystal doorknob because it was so beautiful to him. But what they really wanted to know what was going on in the house and who was in the house. But
Yeah.
they coined the term doorknobbing when you get stuck on something that's irrelevant and start describing it in detail. So
It
that's
meant it meant it meant a lot to him, right? So he
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so pretty. I'm going to draw a picture of it. I'm going to describe it. It's sparkly, and it's like, yeah. So that's common knowledge that that kind of thing happens when you're a remote viewer, and that's why they have more than one remote viewer work a target because somebody could just stray off and do something like that.
Hmm.
I thought that was so great. We so in class, you might have been, I don't know if it was year one or year two, but you did a remote viewing with the class at Barbara Brennan School, the
Yeah,
BBSH class, and it was great. I think we did maybe 4 or 5 cards. We spent about 5 minutes on each card, and it's funny for me. I was just kind of in this like dark space for a while, and then I saw a white light, and then it was I was like, oh my god, it's the moon. It feels like the moon. I'm like, oh my god, it's definitely the moon. And I had a lot of signs pointing towards it. And then the first 3 cards was like a tractor. It was like a landscaping view. Maybe the beach was the third one, but the fourth card was the moon. And it was so cool how you were saying that you kind of get drawn to things that you're more, interested in, or you have more of a connection with. Maybe I'm not
yeah.
sure, but
Well, and what I they had me teaching that that's not remote viewing protocol like they do in the military. The It's a very strict hands-on. You're just writing reams and reams of paper when you're doing remote viewing. And the idea, their theory on remote viewing is that your subconscious mind has access to all the information in the universe, but your conscious mind, your ego, wants to be in control. So basically, that whole protocol for the controlled remote viewing is to make your conscious mind busy so your subconscious mind can bring the information in. So,
Hmm.
and I talked to Joe McMonagle because he lives right there by the Monroe Institute, and he said he doesn't even use the protocol anymore. And it's interesting, they liken this access to information as kind of like the aperture on a camera. You keep opening it, and finally it kind of stays open all the time. And that's why the remote viewing magazine that they send us, email us uh, every few months, is called Aperture, because they liken
Hmm.
that access to information as the aperture on a camera. So what the Joe said, he did so much remote viewing over the years, he doesn't need to do all that protocol with the paper. He just quiets his mind, meditates for a little bit, and goes to the target and describes it. And I guess what a lot of how he makes his living is a lot of corporations want to know what future trends are going to be so that they can be ahead of the
Right.
curve, and he's really good at that. As good at
Can you
Yeah.
determining like oil wells or trends in commerce. You know what the future holds. What are we going to be buying lots of 5 years from now, or what's going to
Right.
be the trend? And yeah, he's
Yeah, there's a term that they use kind of in the investment world a lot, where it's like from hockey, go where the puck is going, kind of be that one step ahead, in business, at least, or investments. That's what they're um, targeting, or the goal is to kind of be ahead of the puck.
yeah.
Yeah,
can you talk a little
but
bit more about what hemisync is, Ed?
About what?
Hemisync?
Oh, Hemisync.
Yeah.
Robert Monroe was a good friend of Barbara Brennan, and I was really lucky because I got to spend a lot of time one on one with her when I was in uh, uh, teacher training, and she was there at the Monroe Institute the night before Robert Monroe died. She did a healing on him. His stepson told me about it. He says she did a healing on him to help him make the transition. And he died the next day. That night she did a healing on him, and but they were good friends. And the
mm,
hemisync is he invented that. He was a sound engineer. He was actually well known, and he did a bunch of Orson Welles radio programs, and he was in sound
mm,
engineer in early TV. And he had this idea that, well, we know that
wow.
even when we're asleep, we hear. So he wondered if he could do some kind of input to the brain while you're sleeping to, say, learn another language or whatever. So
Hmm.
he experimented with, he got the idea that what's going to happen if I feed a signal in one ear at, say, 100 hertz and in the other ear at 110 hertz? What happens to the brain? And so they actually did, I don't know, it was MRIs or whatever to track what happens in the brain.
The scan.
And when you do that, it synchronizes the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and they discovered that that's what happens when you're in deep meditation. And usually it takes like a meditator years and years to reach that level of brain synchronization. Well, with hemisync, where they do those diverse sounds to the brain, it happens automatically, and you go into that altered state. And depending on what frequency it is, some frequencies will cause you to go out of body. Some frequencies will just expand your consciousness. There's specific frequencies for different results. And
Hmm.
so Barbara was drawn to that work when she heard about it. So she started going to the Monroe Institute. I remember, I think she told me that she was in the Lifelines program. And then in the Lifelines program, you actually go back to past lives and examine some of your past lives because the
Hmm.
frequency is set for that, set for
Hmm.
you to explore your past lives.
Wow.
Really interesting. interesting program. And one of the things you do in that is you do soul retrieval.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that stood out in my mind there was I was in this altered state and I was watching this young boy that was on a go kart, and he was killed because he was a little reckless and he hit the back of a parked car and he died.
Mm.
And in his trauma, he kept reliving that. And
Hmm.
finally, I stepped in and said, "Hey, you don't have to keep doing this. It's over. You're on the other side." And all of a sudden, then that whole scene evaporated.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
I've had a few recollections of some of my past lives, and I've had some past life readings, which is interesting. But Barbara told me she had been through something like 17,000 past lives at that point in her life. And
Hmm.
some of them were with Robert Monroe, where they were working on expanding human consciousness. And for the last, I don't know how far back that goes, but 17,000 lives, that's a lot. And she said she could
There.
recall most of them.
So
So,
Wow.
for the average person, do you recommend dabbling in hemisync to expand one's consciousness just in an everyday way, or?
oh, absolutely. I still listen to them a few times a week. Yeah, it calms the mind. And even if you don't have any kind of psychic outcome from it, it just like if you just listen to one of those hemisyncs, I think that there's one called Relax. You listen to it for half an hour, you feel like you just had a 5 hour nap. You just feel so refreshed, and it's like I guess
Mm.
it's resetting the brain. I don't know all of the uh, scientific reasons for that, but it's calming, soothing, and you very well may have some supernatural experiences too.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Being able to tap into that space, and I guess just YouTube. You can go on YouTube to find those.
You can go to the Monroe website and download the sound files, or there's even some apps now where you can download an app and it'll do a hemisync. It's not called hemisync, but there's different apps where you can tailor it to what frequency you want and just experiment with it and see what works for you. And actually, the Monroe Institute's where I found out about Barbara Brennan School. I'd already bought Barbara's book, but it was just sitting on the shelf. And that first time I went to Monroe, there was two ladies that were students at Barbara Brennan,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them lived not too far away from the Monroe Institute, and she brought her massage table so she could do healings because she had homework to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a few spare rooms and other in another building besides the main building, and she was doing healings, and I volunteered to get a healing, and I'm laying on the table. And when she started working on me, I thought, oh, this is really relaxing. I feel really good. And then I saw two little angels flying around the room, and I said, holy shit, there's something to this. I gotta dig into this and find out what the hell. I mean, I don't know anybody else that can summon angels. So, and at that point, I'm thinking I had never seen an angel before, but after that, I had quite a few incidents where I saw them. But that was my introduction to Barbara Brennan, is seeing angels flying around the room while I was getting my first healing.
That's
So that kind of
awesome.
gets your attention.
Yeah, you never know. You never know who else might be flying around.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought
Great.
that up. I was curious to see and to hear, what brought you to Barbara Brennan, and yeah, those experiences are just so powerful, and they, like you said, they kind of open, like a portal opens up,
Yeah.
and there's just so much there, in the unseen, and you said there were other experiences that you had that other angelic experiences.
Well, yeah, not all of them were. I mean, some of them are a little unsettling. Just when I started the school, I was going through a divorce, and so I was kind of making up for lost time. I was partying a lot, and I went to a healer that was at that time a year one teacher, Christy Firth. And I went to see her. She was my BIP, and on occasion I'd get a healing from her. And one day I walked into her healing room, and she looked behind me and says, "Oh, Archangel Michael's behind you. He's kind of watching over you." And she showed me a painting of somebody had channeled of Archangel Michael. So I didn't think much of it. I was raised as a Catholic, and I kind of discounted all the religious icons like archangels and that kind of stuff. Think, oh, that's just a bunch of, that's a myth or whatever.
Right.
And so the following week, at that time, I was dating a really beautiful woman from Brazil, and the Brazilians like to party. So I was partying a lot, and I woke up one morning with somebody shaking me. And I open my eyes, and there's Archangel Michael, and basically telepathically telling me to get my shit together, that I'm partying too much and I got work to do, and you need to, start studying more. And it's like I never knew you would get a message like that from an angel, especially an archangel. So since then, I've always felt like, oh, that Archangel Michael's kind of, I gotta, pay attention because he's gonna call me on my shit.
That's awesome.
Wow. That's
Um, go
And
ahead.
all that being said, I've had a lot of supernatural experiences, but I I've talked to other teachers, and a lot of the other teachers I've known over the years at Barbara Brennan have had equally amazing experiences. So it's like I don't
mm,
want to get anybody to get the idea that I'm something special, because that's not the case. I know a lot of people that have had experiences like this. Um, And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but once you've been through a week of school, you walk out into back into the world, and you're in this expanded state of consciousness, and you see
mm.
things differently. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. I've been listening to different spiritual teachers here and there, and I remember it was recently. I think it might have been Alan Watts. He was saying how he's nothing special. Everything is out in the open. Everything is out in the open, and it's a matter of I think Barbara Brennan calls it the window of perception, or cone of perception, or window of reality. It's just the perception, and it is that consciousness within the person open enough where the mental ego is quieting down to see what's there, what's out in the open.
Yeah.
um, and I was actually, one of the things I was going to ask you a little bit more about, if you're comfortable sharing, is those experiences are just so powerful, and allowing everyone an opportunity of different modalities and different ways to go into them. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the breath work that you do, which is so powerful. And I know we were talking a lot about just raising the vibration of a frog. The one
Oh yeah,
example you're
the frog and the
sharing.
salamander. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's pretty remarkable. I first heard about that listening to David Wilcock. I've been following him for like 20 years, and he's written some amazing books. If you haven't read any of his books, I would recommend them. But he talked about, and I think there's another book that I love. It's called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, and where they did that, and that's mentioned in that book. David Wilcock mentions it in one of his books, where they wondered why a salamander can regrow a leg or a tail after it's injured, and the physiology is almost identical in a frog. So they said, well, why can a salamander regenerate itself and a frog doesn't? And
Mm,
so what the discerning difference was that the salamander has a much higher electrical charge in its body than a frog does. So they said, well, if that's the case, how can we raise the electrical charge in a frog so it's the same as a salamander, and see if it can regenerate legs? And of course, they found that it could. That they cut the leg off of a frog, they somehow, without injuring the frog, raised its electrical capacity, and it regrew its leg. So
mm,
that caught my attention, because I'm thinking,
for
well,
sure.
I always feel like when I do breath work, it raises the electrical charge in my body. And one of the reasons I believe that is because years ago, when I first got into breath work, I had two of my buddies who were curious about it because, it says like Ed's kind of gone off the trail because he's doing all these strange things like breath work. So I said, hey, I'll do a session with you. And so these are my high school buddies. I've known them since I was like 16 years old. And
Mm.
so they were blown away by the breath work. And then we're kind of winding down. We'd maybe about 10 minutes before we finished the breath work session, and we were talking about how much we weighed now compared to how much we weighed in high school. And I had one of those bathroom scales. It was new at the time where it measured the body fat index because it had these metal pads on it where it would measure the body fat by measuring the electrical impedance through your body, and that's how it differentiates between what's muscle mass and what's fat. So one of my
Right.
buddies, he's still vibrating like crazy after doing the breath work. He stepped on the scale and it blew it out. The electrical, and it had brand new batteries in it, and the electrical charge from his body fried the batteries in the thing, and it stopped working. So I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." So
It's,
you know, this
it's a
vibration that we feel after we do breath work is an
powerful
electrical
charge.
charge. And I said, well, maybe there's a correlation between that and regenerating your body. Doing breath work
Mm.
quite possibly helps regenerate your body at a physical level. So it's not just a spiritual or emotional practice, but it's also a physical rejuvenation. So
Right.
And
that's
there's
why I do breath work almost every day. I said, okay, this is part of my well care.
yeah, speaking of strange experiences after Barbara Brennan, I remember coming home after a week of Barbara Brennan and walking into the living room, and we have these, lights that are up in the ceiling that are LED. They never, never die. And I walked into the room and they all just went out
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
for no reason.
yes. I noticed that happen a few times as well. So yeah, I'm glad you validated. That's well. Plus, one of the things that Lynn Buchanan was known for, and the reason that at the head of Army intelligence way back when was a guy named General Stubblebine, who was able to think outside the box. He was a student of physics, and he says, well, if you really study physics, we should be able to change our mindset so we can walk through walls. And so he would try that on occasion after he meditated to see if he could walk through the wall. But Lynn was uh, recruited because he would walk into a room and all the computers would crash. So, so don't be surprised, Stacy, if after a week at Barbara Brennan that your all the electrical stuff around your house starts acting up.
Wow.
High vibration, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And what
So,
about how does sorry, Gil, I know you're interested in this too, but the nitric oxide, how does that fit into the breath work? I know you talk about that a little bit on your
Yeah,
website.
there was a guy. I can't think of his name off the head. I think I sent. Did I send you the article, Gilbert?
I saw it on your website, I
Oh,
think.
I've,
okay. Yeah, I need to update that website. Actually, the lady that worked on that passed away, so I've got to uh, uh, recruit somebody to you know, update it. But yes, he got a Nobel Prize, I think, in 1996 for the discovery of nitric oxide. And by breathing through your nose deeply, you create nitric oxide, which he calls a miracle molecule because it's really important in your immune system. He even claimed that you could be sick, and if you did a breathwork session, breathing deeply through your nose, like we do the breathwork through the mouth, where you don't pause
Mhm.
between the in breath and out breath, that it creates an abundant amount of nitric oxide, which kills pathogens. There's something about that molecule
mm,
that hunts out all the things that might be harmful to you and and uh, and kills them.
neutralizes.
Yeah, neutralizes them. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's the other component of the well-being that with breath work. And the thing is, we do breath work through our mouth because it's really powerful. It really clears and charges our field. But on a day-to-day basis, you shouldn't be walking around breathing through your mouth. It's not healthy for you. only doing it through your mouth in a breathwork session for half an hour to an hour is really powerful. It clears and charges your field, but
Got
normally
it.
you should be breathing through your nose.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember you saying, just to, and if correct me, as I go into it, but the breath work. So it's a continual breath in and out for a set period of time, 30
Yeah,
minutes, an hour, or longer. And I remember you describing it kind of like if you're going out for a run, you're really building up a lot of energy in the body, and you're expelling it with the run. But the breath work is stationary. It's kind of a meditative breath work, continuous breathing pattern that builds up a charge within the body, and then within the energetic field of the individual, and that allows for additional doorways to open. And does that sound about how you would describe it?
yeah, yeah. Because when you're running, the physical exertion, you're discharging the energy that you're bringing in by breathing like that. But when you're stationary and you're breathing like that, the charge just keeps building and building. And the whole thing, I think I mentioned to you that Wilhelm Reich and Carl Jung both did breathwork with their patients almost 100 years ago. And Wilhelm Reich was the one that uh, focused on the tetany. That's that pressure you feel in your body. Most people feel it in their hands or their legs, where it's
Mm-hmm.
really intense pressure, and your hands might feel like they're cramped and you can't move them. But
Mm.
or you might feel it in your chakras. Um, Years ago, when I did I did breath work for the first time. I found this lady. Actually, I was there. Was one of the ladies at the Monroe Institute teaches breath work. She lives in Tampa. Her name is Francine King. But I didn't want to have to travel all the way to Tampa to do breath work. And I was mentioning I had a friend named Lever Wilson who was a rolfer. I saw him once a month, and I told him about I wanted to learn breath work. And he said, "Oh, I know somebody right here in Fort Lauderdale that does it." So I went to her, and that was an amazing experience. So the first time I said, "Oh, I did the first session, and I felt immense
Uh-huh.
pressure. I felt the tetany in my hands and feet, but also felt a strong pressure in my first chakra. And
Uh-huh.
I said, "Oh, I want to keep doing this." So I made a standing schedule with her to do it once a week. So it was amazing because the second week I did it, I still had the tetany in my hands and feet, but then I felt the pressure in my second chakra. So it was like bringing the energy up my vertical power current. And so the seventh
Right.
week, and it progressed. Each week, it was the next chakra up that I would feel the pressure, and it was like I was
Yeah.
just methodically clearing and charging each chakra, going up the vertical power current. The
Oh, it's so
seventh
great.
the seventh week, I felt like there was almost like an explosion out the top of my head, the seventh chakra, and I was in this amazing bliss that I didn't want to end. It was like orgasmic. It was better than sex. So, or any drug that I'd ever done.
Well, I was just about
Okay.
to ask you about the Kundalini awakening. Do you feel like that's what was happening, or?
Yeah, I do believe that that was it. Yeah. Because
Wow.
on occasion when I do breath work, you know how you get that whole vibration in your body going up your spine. Yeah, that's what I'm sure that's what it was. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't know enough to make the connection. But yeah, that certainly was a Kundalini energy. And then I read later, oh, that could be dangerous. You have a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I said, well, felt great to me. So, but
That's so great. If there was a marketing tagline for breath work, it's better than sex.
well, yeah, and that's what when I first went on the spiritual journey, I was in my mid to late 40s, and at that time, I went down to Peru and did ayahuasca, and I was doing psilocybin mushrooms and peyote, all kinds of stuff like that. And then I realized some of the experiences I had with breath work were just as powerful. And I didn't have to sit
Mm.
around a campfire for 12 hours throwing up.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was curious about that. The other natural ways of getting to those different levels of consciousness and opening up portals. And
Jules, who we had on, for a podcast, he had a phenomenal story about ayahuasca, and then I've been speaking to a few other people as well about it. And the breath work is a very natural way of getting to those different levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
But I think you also, I mean, you did have some. So, if you don't mind, we back up a minute. So, when you do the breath work, do you have any, top experiences that you're comfortable sharing? Your revelations, or guidance, or angelic type of experiences that came through the breath work? Because I know when we talked about the ayahuasca, um, one of the cool things about that, I mean, that I remembered you sharing was the shaman, I think, that who was facilitating it was able to see what you were seeing, and
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. So I just was going to see if there's what your thoughts were there.
I just feel expanded and connected with everything in the universe. Usually, when I do a good, breathwork session, I'm trying to. It does expand your high sense perception. I noticed that, but for me, it's really pretty subtle. I don't have any other than that first time I did it. Of course, I don't know. I get guidance almost nonstop. And I can't really name any specific incident.
Sure.
It just makes me feel better. I amps
Mm-hmm.
up the high sense perception. Uh, I guess it's I kind of take it for granted, but I've been around people where I could tell what they were thinking and name it, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. Like, and I was, well, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this, this, and this, and this. And how in the hell did you know that? Just like, well, so you kind of sometimes you just need to keep it to yourself. But
Well, and if I may, from your website, you have a whole list of physical benefits.
yeah,
Stimulates circulation, reduces worry and anxiety, enhances the awareness of self-sabotaging patterns, resolves addictions, relieves depression. I mean, you know, I was really impressed by this list, so I actually took a picture of
oh
it.
yeah. Actually, what comes to my mind when you
Nice,
say that,
Stacy.
when you say that, when you say that, Stacy, what comes to my mind is, God, this was about 5 years ago. I don't know, for some reason, I was having, in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was having a panic attack. And I don't
Mm.
know what caused it, but I said, well, only resource I have right now is to do some breath work. And I did breath work for 3 hours. Oh, I think I just lost you guys.
Oh, I'm still
Are you
here.
there?
I can hear you. Yeah, I
Oh,
can
okay.
hear
I
you.
can,
Yep.
okay. It came back. I breathed for 3 hours. So I think that's the longest I've ever done breath work. And at the end of 3 hours, I, the panic attack had completely disappeared. And I felt this amazing bliss. So how can you
Mm,
go from just feeling like you're emotionally and psychologically dying to just being in a blissful state? And
yeah.
that's probably the most powerful experience I've had doing breath work, is to breathe my way out of a panic attack.
Wow.
So
Wow,
yeah,
that's
that's the thing that
amazing.
sticks in my mind.
Yeah,
That's great to
definitely.
know.
It's
And
great that you thought to do that.
yeah, and I wonder too. You mentioned earlier. I'm just kind of connecting the dots between the remote viewing and the breath work and emotions, because you said when you're remote viewing, emotional information can get in the way, and I wonder if how you work with emotions, and whether part of breath work is to try to resolve emotions, and whether emotions, I know we don't label things good or bad, but is there a place for them in the relationship between all these things? Is there a place for the feeling sense that arises?
Well,
um
yeah, there's a
Mm.
lot of different ways you can go with that. Maybe the emotions will um, help you look in the
Sorry.
look in the direction of what's important in your life right now, or what you maybe should focus on. Um, a lot of times when I'm leading a group of people in breath work, I if I ask them if they have an upwelling of strong emotions, to just be a witness to it, because kind of my feeling on that, if you've got trauma, childhood trauma, and you might have intellectually worked through it through therapy, but the trauma um, is trapped in your body at the cellular level.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So I've had a lot of people will have a strong emotional release, crying and whatever, and they can't make a connection between the emotional release and what caused it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because they've already let go of what happened, but the emotion is trapped in their body at the cellular level. Because you
Mm.
think about it, normally when you are traumatized, you hold your breath, and that's what locks it
Mm.
into your system.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, you
Yeah,
notice a little
that's
kid, they're really upset. They'll hold the breath until their face turns blue.
Yeah.
They
Well, I
they
keep it
stop
still
breathing.
to be that.
I
Yeah,
totally hear that.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
But you were
So
And have
mentioning the altered states. One thing sticks out about the altered states of consciousness. Well, I noticed when I did ayahuasca that telepathically I was communicating with the other people in the room. And it was
mm,
amazing to me that the shaman could see what I was seeing and experience what I was experiencing. And that's one of the reasons that I started breathing with my clients. I, I, uh, as far as I know, I'm the only facilitator that does that, because I feel like, oh, well, it the shamans do it so they can be at that same vibration and kind of
mhm.
lead the expedition. So I got in the habit about a year or so ago of doing the breath work with my clients. And
mm,
also, and I encourage other people that start doing breath work to do that, because just imagine if you do a breath work session and then go do a healing, you're
Mm.
um, you're in an altered state. If you can learn to work and function while you're in that altered state, it gives you a much more powerful basis for your healing work.
Yeah, I
mm,
So it's
agree.
not easy, but I think it's worthwhile to do that. And I'm kind of an advanced um, criteria would be, I mean, to be an advanced breath worker, a breath work facilitator, is to do the breath work along with your clients,
Hmm.
so that you can kind of be in the same place they're being. You don't have to imagine what they're feeling as you're doing it with them. And that stuck with me um, from the
Yeah,
plant
definitely.
medicine ceremonies.
wow.
When you keep the pace and you're doing it with the class,
Yeah,
for me, I think it's really beneficial. You know, I really enjoy that, and it helps me out significantly. And then you also, I don't know if it's something that you do, but then you strategically put in the ohms
yeah.
at different times during the breathwork session. So I don't know if that's something that you implemented, and I guess why do you mind sharing, like, the benefit of those ohms?
Well, if there's any stagnant energy, or if you're feeling the energy stuck in your body at some place, and that's usually what happens when you feel the pressure in one of your chakras, is that there's energy that's not moving, and that extra chanting or oming actually creates. If you could just sit and they talk about Gregorian chants, where you just chant for a half an hour or an hour. That puts you in an altered state, because the vibration uh, um, activates your pineal gland. It it sends energy up through your vertical power current. So it's an additional tool. If you're running all this energy through your body and it feels like it's a little stuck, that extra little vibration of chanting, you'll notice the
Mm.
vibration in your chest, and that may shake loose. And I just do that intuitively. I just kind of, okay, feels like we need to do some ohms now. And so there's like nothing specific that happens that just leads me to it. It's just an intuitive thing. Okay, we're going to do some
Yeah,
ohms.
your intuition. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're guided to do it. I
And
know,
I wonder,
Stacy, you do that.
um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I was actually going to ask. I'm so curious what you think of there's a yoga practice that I do in which we used bandhas. So it's partly, holding the breath and contracting an area, like the different chakras, depending on which one we're working with during the class. I wonder
Is
if you
that
have any.
that's
It's
Kundalini
a
yoga?
Yeah, Kundalini
Oh
yoga,
yeah.
Kundalini yoga. So I wonder if you have any opinion in breath work as far as holding the breath, or using bandhas or anything like that
I think
in
that's
the practice.
worthwhile. And they mentioned that in that light on pranayama breathing by Iyengar. They talk about all of that. There's so many different kinds of breath work for specific things, and I think that's worthwhile. In fact, I had a yoga teacher mention that to me. She practices Kundalini yoga, and she works with those the bandhas. Is that what they're called? Yeah,
Yes, it means lock.
yeah,
So, and it's interesting because they're used on the structured levels. So on the root, the third, and the throat.
yeah. Yeah, well, the breath work that I teach is like really it's scratching the surface of the whole. God, there's it's difficult to put it in words about the whole practice of breath work. What I do is this very narrow perspective. You know, clean and charge the field. You know, amp up the energy in the body. But there's
Hmm.
so much more to it with it, just a lot more specific, like you're talking about. And so I'm kind of a neophyte when it comes to that, but I know about it, but I don't know a lot about it.
Have you
Hmm.
studied any specific tradition, any ancient, or are you interested in any traditions that go back?
Well, what I realized once, there was, I can't remember the people that first introduced breath work in this country maybe 30, 40 years ago, but they were like introducing it like it was something new that they invented. And I soon discovered by reading about it, it goes back thousands of years, ancient pranayama breathing back to different Hindu traditions. And I think even the Tibetans practice a form of breath work as well. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
new. It's been around for a long, long time, but it's kind of more or less been rediscovered, you know.
Mm, yeah, well, that's great. And the practice that you introduced, the class that we took, this is something that you've developed. Is that right?
Yeah, because I facilitated more on being aware of what frequency or what um, uh, we talk about the different levels of the field and the differences between the frequency of the first level and the seventh level, and I kind of think of it more in terms of the frequency of the auric field, um,
Hmm.
and specific about raising that energy up your vertical power current. And I think of it more in terms of what we learn in the school, uh,
Mm,
as opposed to traditional things. I just took what I learned in Barbara Brennan School and applied it to how I teach breath work.
mm,
Yeah. And I've just tweaked it. Like I said, as far as I know, I'm the only one that does breath work with the clients. And I think that's
Hmm.
like,
mm,
you know, don't tell somebody to do something you're not willing to do. Because it is, at the end of the day, it's hard work.
mm-hmm.
And especially if you're doing it on your own, to breathe like that for an hour on your own is not easy.
Right.
It's a lot easier if somebody else is doing it with you.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
you'll
it
notice
does.
that. You
Do you
go
feel
ahead.
as though the more you do it, the it's kind of like going to the gym. You kind of like getting into a routine, into a pattern, and it gets a little bit easier by staying with it.
Yeah, and I noticed that I don't get the tetany anymore. I don't have
Mm.
the blocks. On occasion, I'll feel a pressure in one of my chakras, but other than that, I don't get the tetany in my hands anymore. I guess I'm used to running a lot more energy.
Mm.
So it's you work through that. So because some people really have uh, the cramps in their hands and their feet, their hands are contorted. Well, and that was the other thing that I recognized early on doing breath work is that people often formed mudras with their hands. So I bought
Mm,
books on mudras And each one of these mudras have a meaning, and a lot of them have to do with changing the channel the electrical impulses move through in your body, depending on what fingers are touching each other. So a lot of them have to do with detoxification. Some of them have to do with unity with the universe. And people form these spontaneously, and they don't even realize that they're doing it.
Mm.
So I've
Wow.
witnessed quite a few. I think I might have mentioned to you before, Gil, about when I first started becoming a facilitator, and that was when I early on in my was in the school. We had one of the students that started speaking a foreign
Mm,
language,
Mm.
and
I
it
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like, and I think it dredged up a past life or something because she didn't speak any other languages, and there was another student that was from Germany there, and she says, "Well, that's German, but it's kind of like an ancient dialect of German. It's like Shakespearean German. It's like some dialect that hasn't been spoken in years, and the only thing we could figure is that somehow she had uh, was reliving some past life in Germany or some
Yeah.
volcanic
Yep.
land. So you never can tell what's going to come up
Right.
in a breathwork session. I thought start with a clean slate. Don't expect that it's going to be anything like your last breathwork session.
Mm,
It can be totally different. So just
hmm.
be open to whatever comes up.
Yeah, I hear you. Um, yeah, it's a powerful practice, and I wasn't sure. So do you are you planning on offering classes or anything like that in the future? I know that you did some in the past.
Um, well, I have former student. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I had a former student um, come to me for breath work, and she said she had done buffo medicine, and she said that this was just as powerful as the buffo medicine she did a few months ago, which
Hmm.
is I've never done that. That it's from a buffo toad.
Huh.
So on occasion, I have former students or referrals come to me, and I'll just do breath work with two or three people in my house. I haven't had a formal class for a while. Um, I'm busy because I own an insurance agency. I run that, so I do
Right.
that. Right now, I'm working on the curriculum for Lisa to do a graduate class in breath work to teach facilitators that are Brennan graduates.
Oh, that's
That's
great.
great.
So that's I'm not sure how that's going to work. We're going to do it 2 days before class one or 2 days after, but I think somehow she's going to tie it to the class week.
Oh, that'd be excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Wow. Well, I
So it looks like it's going to be 5 days. It's going to be 2 days in person, then a 1 day online class, and then another 2 days in person at some later point, and then maybe even in a more advanced class where you learn to breathe with the clients.
wow. I'm looking forward to that for sure, Ed. Um, so I was going to wind down the podcast here, and actually, I would love to invite you back on, maybe at some point in the future, because I know we talked a little bit about the quantum field, the holographic, universal energy field, and things like that, and I feel like that could be a full episode if you're comfortable talking about that, with us. I would love it.
Oh yeah, we could get into some really interesting stuff there about shifts in timelines, the Mandela effect, things like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, I want was there anything else that relating to the breath work that you feel you want to share before we wind down?
Um, there was one thing that for some reason is sticking in my mind that, and I think Stacy kind of touched on it a little bit, that altered state that you're in after you leave a week of school. I had an incident when I was a teacher trainee in Austria, and to commute to that school in Austria, you fly to I would fly to Munich in Germany, and then take a bus to Salzburg, and because Salzburg was the closest town to where the school was at that time.
Hmm.
And there was an incident that happened that just still blows my mind, is that I was the only American English speaking person on this shuttle bus. There was like 20 people on the shuttle bus. And I'd been through a really deep week of school at Barbara Brennan. I'm sitting in the bus and I'm listening to all these people speaking German, and I could understand everything they were saying, and I don't speak German.
Wow.
And there was like a couple of things. It's like, well, somebody in the back of the bus asked the bus driver if they could borrow a pen, and I knew exactly what they asked him, even though I don't speak German. And sure enough, the bus driver turns around and hands them a pen. And then somebody asked, "Well, when are we going to stop to use the bathroom?" And and um, and there was a couple of people that asked that, and the bus driver said, "Well, we're just going to pull over in the next area where there's some woods, and you can go out into the woods and relieve yourselves." And sure enough, 5 minutes later, he pulled over, and everybody got out of the bus to go in the woods and relieve themselves. And it's like,
I love
Wow.
that
this is
story.
just amazing that I can understand another language that I don't speak, and it was all telepathic. And so that
Yep.
just led me to believe, of what are we capable of?
Yeah.
What is our true potential?
Mm.
Yeah. So I'll leave you with that
Absolutely.
thought. What is our true potential?
I love that.
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Stacy.
it's better than sex.
What's that?
Whatever it is, it's better than sex.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Stacy, did you have anything else that you were curious about, or?
Um, I got a little bit into the reading about the nitric oxide. I don't want to get too, we can again have another episode about this. I'm curious, does it actually, because people are taking nitric oxide supplements,
Right.
do you think that one could use, would the breath work have a similar effect, such as, reducing heart disease? I feel like I read something about it increasing telomeres, even, like extending one's lifespan and things like that. Do you think breath work could be a substitute for medicine?
Well, I don't know if it would be a substitute, but definitely a complementary practice. And it would be good if we could get somebody that, with a scientific or medical background, that could track that, get a group of people that, a control group and then another group that's doing it, and see how it affects our physiology. That would be really worthwhile,
Mm.
to see how much of a difference it makes. I'm convinced. I mean, you know, I'm convinced that it does work and does help, but that's just anecdotal. It would be nice to have some
Mhm.
scientific research to show.
Well, if we can
Really
figure out how
cool.
to charge money for breathing, then we might be able to get someone to back it up.
Yeah,
Yeah, the capitalistic way, right? Sure. So Ed, thank you so much for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy schedule, and yeah, we really are just honored to have you with us.
it was a pleasure to be with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk to you all day.
Well, by the way, Stacy, admire you. You practice Kundalini yoga. I do hot yoga. To me, Kundalini yoga was more of a challenge. I have a friend that her and her husband moved farther north in Florida, but she practiced Kundalini yoga, and I was curious about it. And I did a session with her and her husband, and it's like, oh man, this kicked my ass. To do yoga and doing the breath of fire, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, I think there are different practices. Gil and I did one this morning, and the way that I practice, it's known to be a very yin way of practice. So we hold the pose for 3 to 5 minutes, which is, can be challenging in itself. And then we have, visualization, breath work, mantras during the pose.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, and I know some people, really try to bring in the energy with it. So I think there might be different ways of practicing.
Well, just holding a pose for 3 to 5 minutes to me seems like a real challenge, because most of the poses in hot yoga are only at the most 1 minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't imagine
Yeah.
holding the warrior pose for 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, I know. I sometimes have to open my eyes because I'm like, whoa. but but
Wow.
yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah, it's thank you for doing that, Stacy. It's a really special routine and
Yeah.
practice, and you bring a lot to it,
Thank you.
with your light and your guidance. It was really great session today.
Thanks.